Morning. Before we get to questions, I'm just going to have a few comments. I've got some notes here because I have a few things to say. On behalf of our organization, I want to extend our sympathies and condolences to Pat's wife, Annabelle, his children, Amy, Beth, Patrick, Johnny, Brittany, Annabelle, and Christiana, his two brothers and sister, and their families, and the entire Bowlen family. Our thoughts are also with everyone who knew him, especially our former players. A lot of them have reached out and had great things to say about Pat, and I've told you, and so many people have told you, how much players meant to Pat. And at the top of that list is someone you're going to hear from shortly. He's sitting over here, John Elway. And I know John will have some great reflections on Pat as well. I want to thank everyone who contributed to this outpouring of support for Mr. Bowlen over the last 3 days. Heard from a lot of NFL owners. I know you all saw so many great comments from them, league office personnel, Commissioner Tagliabue, Commissioner Goodell, current and former players, current and former coaches have reached out. Some of them will be at either at the tribute tomorrow or at the service a week from today. Dick Montfort had some wonderful things to say, and I thank him for that. Stan Kroenke had some very nice things to say. I thank him for that. The outpouring of support has been incredible, as I said, and we are grateful for that. We're especially grateful for the outpouring of support from our fans and the people in this community. I read, I heard, I watched a lot of people commenting about Pat, a lot of our fans, and it was evident to me that they had a real connection to him, and that everything that he did for the NFL and for the Broncos especially, they were very, very not only respectful but grateful for. And even if they didn't know him, so many people felt like they had a connection to him, and I think that speaks so admirably of Pat. I also have been doing a lot of listening and reading and watching over the last few days. I want to thank everybody here. There have been some great tributes and some great touching columns or articles or TV clips, some of the stuff that was done on radio. I've tried to absorb it all, listen to some of your podcasts and rewatched what I could, and it was just outstanding. And on the tributes, and you really did right by Mr. Bowlen, and we thank you for that. I thank you for that. I'm sure the family was grateful as well. A little bit about Mr. B from a general perspective and a few personal comments. He was one of the greatest contributors in football history. Everything he did for this team, for the league, for our community, and he left an indelible impact on so many during his 35 years as owner of this team. For me personally, he was a really good friend, a great mentor. He was a great boss. There are some characteristics that I've mentioned before when you've all asked me questions. And he was humble, he was modest, he was shy, he was very kind, and he was very generous. There were a few things that I don't think that I might have left out in terms of his work here and my interactions with him that I feel compelled to share, and I think people need to know. As shy as he was, I've heard some people over the weekend listening or reading say at times he was a man of few words. I got to tell you, he was a great communicator. First of all, he spoke to you every day. He had a flip phone. He never got an iPhone. He had a flip phone. And I bet I heard from him every day. when he was here and present. He loved to stay in touch. He needed to know what was going on. And what that did for me was know that he was paying attention, and I think that trickled down to everybody in the organization. The fact that he used to like to say, "I'm here every day," and that was a fact. That was true. I mean, obviously he had meetings that he had to conduct for the league, and he had other appointments and whatnot. But the fact that he was here every day, that he was present, I think had a profound effect on the organization, because this was really his job, his only job, as he called it, it let everybody know how seriously he was taking it. Whether it was, and it wasn't so much that he walked around to talk to everybody in the building, but I think everybody knew that he was here. And that was true of players, of coaches, of staff members, of everybody. And I think it was impactful on everyone. Pat Bowlen showed a tremendous amount of strength and courage and resiliency and spirit in fighting Alzheimer's disease over the last few years. As his family so appropriately put it, now heaven got a little bit more orange and blue. We all miss him greatly. We will join the Broncos, and our stadium group will join the Bowlen family in inviting everybody, the general public, to celebrate Pat's life and career at an open house tribute tomorrow. It's a tribute to him. It's kind of cool. We're setting up like a museum walkway that has a lot of his personal and Bronco memorabilia. And then at the end of the line is a tribute to him where members of the public can pay their respects to his family, and all family members will be there tomorrow between the hours of 10 and 3. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be a nice send-off for Pat, and obviously open to the public, and we're expecting quite a few people to make the journey down to Broncos Stadium at Mile High. It's a sad time. There's no question about it. It's been a tough few days, but we're excited to carry on for Pat, and we're excited to celebrate his induction into the Pro Football Fame in August in Canton, and then we'll do some things during the regular season, obviously to honor him as well. And with that, I think I'll just turn it over to you with questions.
Yeah, Joe, have you talked to Annabelle? How's she doing?
Annabelle came over to the offices Friday afternoon, and she wanted to see Pat's office, and so we went in, and she's doing the best she can. It's very emotional, but she's got a good sense of humor. She reflected on some things. She reflected on a time that she claimed she beat him in a marathon, which I think can be verified. Actually, Annabelle was a very good athlete, and her spirits were remarkably good, and it was really, really fun and nice to see her come over. I was here. Lisa Williams was here, and Rach Slifka, and we kind of chatted her up, and she did most of the talking, and it was nice. It was a nice moment.
Hey, Joe, of all the owner statements, Shad Khan said that Pat provided the blueprint for ownership in professional sports. When you hear something like that, what does it mean to you in this organization?
Well, I'm not surprised Shad said that. I guess we all lived it, so we assumed this was the way it was everywhere, but I can't speak to that. He's the only owner I've ever worked for. But I think it is recognition of his artful way of running a team, which is to hire a lot of people that you trust and let them do their jobs, but remind them that you're paying attention. And That's one part of it. Another part of it is dedicating yourself to the greater good of the National Football League. And Pat did that in so many ways. As you know, you talked to me, Ryan, about all the committees that he served on and the work that he did for the league, and really serving as a trusted advisor for Paul Tagliabue and then Roger Goodell through the years. So, his participation there, his love and devotion to this team is second to none. So I can see why Shad would say that.
Joe, there's been such an outpouring of affection by fans in the way they connected to Mr. B. And there's been a movement maybe to try fans wanting the stadium named after him. Is that realistic? Is that something Pat would have wanted? Obviously, again, I've never seen fans react to an owner in this way.
I've seen that, and I've listened to that. And I would say sometimes when I look at things that involve Pat personally that come up now that he hasn't been president, he hasn't been here, I try to think what he would want. I don't think he would want that, so I don't think we're going to do that. We've honored him with a statue with a Ring of Fame pillar and his plaque with the Ring of Fame. I think we'll do some things this season to honor him. But if we were to put his name on the stadium, I can remember him when he knew I was off track saying, "Joe, just a second here." And I think that would be his reaction, and there are probably some people that disagree, and I respect that. But for now, that is not something that would be in our plans.
Hey, Joe, by virtue of his selection to the Hall of Fame, Mr. Bowlen is one of the greatest owners in the 100-year history of this league. Is there any reflection you might be able to share that just illustrates what made Mr. Bowlen a great owner?
Well, I touched on a few things and reflect on a few instances. From me, my personal perspective, he was, I don't know, I think I mentioned his competitiveness. And I'll tell this story. We were playing the Oakland Raiders in the very first game of the 2008 season, and Mike had a great game. Mike Shanahan had a great game plan, and we jumped off to a big lead, and we were in total control of the game. And it was Cutler and Eddie Royal and Tony Scheffler's show that night. I think we won 41-14 or something. But we were way ahead in the third quarter. And generally, when I sat next to Pat during games, I sort of felt like my job was to inform him of how much time was on the clock, and if we could get 3 more first downs, we'd be in good shape if we were up by 10 and things like that. I was kind of figuring out how much, how the clock would trickle down. And in this instance, we were well ahead and we were playing well. And I said, Pat, we can actually enjoy this game. This is. I don't recall a game, and he stopped me in mid-sentence. He said, "Let me tell you how many games I've enjoyed over the years." He said, "I got this anxiety level, and until the gun sounds, it's never over. But I can count on one hand," and he puts up 5 fingers, "how many games I've actually recall that I can fully enjoy." And he said, "Tonight's one of them." But I think that speaks to his, his competitive fire. I mean, we'd be ahead by, I'm sure in your minds, watching games, in control of games. But Pat had those binoculars to his eyes and fire burning through them, and until the gun sounded, and then it was great. He really celebrated his victories with the team. I mean, there's a few other things, I don't know, in terms of his personal characteristics. He was generous with his time. He was generous with so many things. And he was, as I said, his kindness, he was a consensus builder. He wasn't antagonistic, or he wasn't confrontive confronting in his style. He really did a good job at the league level on his committees of bringing people together, helping the commissioners that he worked with together on so many different issues. And he had great instincts. The family had a statement on Friday, and there was one poignant remark to it, which was he told us to have fun, but always keep the big picture in mind. And Pat was really good at that, and I was certainly in the beginning stages of my working for him, I was sort of in the weeds with the minutia. And he, again, he's, you know, just a second here, he would say to me, and he would, he'd say, let's look at this thing. Let's look at the big picture here. And his instincts were very good. That's one thing. He had great instincts about things. He wasn't always right. He wasn't perfect, and he'd be the first to admit that. But generally speaking, I think a great part of his success was because of his instincts. They were terrific.
Joe, you touched a couple times on an in-season tribute or something of that nature. What has been talked about, if anything? Is that a patch, a decal? Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, I think we're going to do, I don't think, we are going to do a decal on the helmet. It will look like this. Somewhat similar, I think. It might be slightly different so that it is pronounced. Pat, I don't think wanted to be attached to a jersey, but I do think that we as an organization probably didn't want to be attached to a helmet either, but I think we owe it to him to honor him in that way. We will do something briefly before the game at our first regular season game. I'm not going to call for remembrance during a preseason game. We'll do it at a regular season game. And then I believe second weekend in October, I don't know the exact date, is our game against Tennessee, and we will honor he and Champ Bailey, he for his Ring of Fame appearance and Champ for his Hall of Fame and Ring of Fame appearances. And so that'll be a nice moment, bringing a lot of people back together here to Denver, because not everybody can make it to Canton. So those are the things that are planned for now.
Joe, the tribute tomorrow, why was it such a priority to give the fans a chance to kind of say goodbye to Mr. Bowlen?
Well, I think we kind of guessed right, based on the outpouring that we've seen from the public, that fans would want to do that. And just in listening to your radio shows or watching on TV and seeing people show up at the stadium to drop flowers off at the statue. There was a great picture in the Denver Post the other day of a guy hoisting up another guy, putting a lei over him. I thought that was pretty cool. So it just, I think all of us felt that, you know, for 35 years to be such an important part of this community, an important part of this team, the most important part in so many respects, it would be appropriate to pay tribute, and I think we'll see a lot of people come to the building tomorrow.
Joe, a lot of former players have described him as more than an owner or boss, but as a confidant, as a friend. Why was he able to relate so well to his players, you think?
You know, I think John, you should ask that of John first, next, but I'll try and answer it, and then John will answer it a lot better than I did, having played for him for so many years and then worked for him. I think he connected with players on a personal level. And he showed concern very quietly and not aggressively, with some compassion and some empathy on whatever. He would show up to see players that were injured. He'd go to the hospital. He'd always be down in the training room asking them how they're doing. If you saw him in the lunchroom, he did that. So he just in his own way could connect and show concern and care. And John will add more personal stories to that. I mean, I felt that. I had one incredible memory with him personally, the way he just from a personal standpoint, had nothing to do with work. It had a little bit to do with work. He would come in the spring. He'd come into my office, and he had a membership up at Castle Pines Golf Club. And he'd say, "What do you think? Let's go. You want to play golf this afternoon?" And I'd pretend I had something busy on my schedule. And I said, "Let me see if I can work it out," you know. And I would certainly go and play, and we'd have lunch. And we would play. He would play in about 2.5 hours, and we'd bomb around in a cart. And because he had to get back here, he wanted to make a few phone calls and always work out at the end of the day. But you'd have a quick lunch and play with him. And then one day we were playing. It was a spectacular day, not a cloud in the sky. And Castle Pines, there's a hole there. It's number 6, and It's a par 4, and it kind of winds down up, and the tee box is up on a vista, I would call it, or up at a high point. And to the south, you can see all the way down past Pikes Peak. And I'm sorry I'm getting into details, but I remember this so vividly. And it was really, it was a spectacular day. Everywhere you looked, there was beautiful Colorado. And here we were playing this beautiful golf course. And I turned to Pat, and I said, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to say it anyway. And I said, Pat, I can't thank you enough. This is about the 10th time we've done that spring. I can't thank you enough for letting me play golf with you here. And without hesitation, he said, no, Joe, I thank you for joining me every time we come out here. And, I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. So that's the kind of personal connection that he made with people.
I guess I just kind of have a follow-up, because I was going to ask you a favorite story, and you just shared a great one. Have you had any more that have come flooding back in the last couple of days?
Generosity, there's so many stories I can tell you. I mean, he wanted to rip up everybody's contract all the time and give them more money, and that's just one part of it. There was one great story I got to tell you. I used to travel with him because he'd like to have company to go to his committee meetings in New York, and then I'd try and figure out some things to do to help the team when I was back there. And one day he had a committee meeting, and Pat had a lot of style. He had a lot of class, and he stayed at the Four Seasons, which was on 57th Street, and I would always stay at the Yale Club down in the middle of Midtown, and then he'd say, "Where are you staying?" And I said, "I'm staying at the Yale Club." He goes, "Why are you doing that?" And I'd end up moving my stuff over to the Four Seasons at his insistence, just a little price point difference there, But so one night we had dinner at a restaurant called Elaine's at the time. I'm not sure it's still open. And we're walking back on 57th Street from the restaurant. And we pass a Louis Vuitton store on 57th Street in New York. And I'm speaking towards Pat's generosity here. And he kind of looks at this hand-me-down suit that I had on. And Pat had some class. He was stylish. He was a good dresser. He kind of looks at me, he goes, points at the window, the glass window on 57th at Louis Vuitton store. He says, "We got to get you some of these suits tomorrow." And I said, "Oh, yeah, sure, whatever, Pat. It sounds great." And they didn't have a price tag on them. Fortunately, the next morning, Pat had a meeting at 9, and we had breakfast, and I said, "You got to get going," and he was distracted. But I didn't. So I waited until the door opened at 10 o'clock. And I went in and I said, how much are these suits? And anyway, I never got them, and I'm glad I didn't ask him to bring out his credit card but that's the kind of person he was. He just, it speaks to, he always thought of others, and anytime you were with him and you were in a gathering, whether it was a dinner, he loved to gather people around and have dinners, and on the road at games, and he would always ask at the end of the meal, "You think everybody had fun? You think everybody had a good time?" And it was always a good time with Pat.
Joe, more so than most sports owners, Pat seemed to understand that the organization was a public trust. How did he get that point across to everybody inside the walls here?
I think he spoke about it, and people heard it. He didn't talk a lot, as you know, Les, but when he spoke, everybody listened. Any meetings that any of us had, whether it was me or John or Mike Shanahan or others, I think he was very clear in getting that point across to people that worked for him. I remember once he said, and it's not so much about public trust, but it's understanding about how we always can never be complacent about what we do here. We were renewing tickets, and we were talking about ticket prices or something, and we were sold out, and we weren't in any jeopardy. But he said to me one time, I'll never forget this, he said, I hope I know you understand this, but everybody needs to understand this, that we can never have our home games blacked out. Somehow we were having a conversation about what was then the NFL blackout policy. He said that would be the single most damaging thing to this organization, which means that we had to sell out every year. And we've done that, and that's all on our great fans and our season ticket members who have been so supportive through thick and thin. But his point was never get complacent. Do not take this for granted. And I believe that lent to his feeling that, these are the people that control this team in some way. Not me, the fans. It's their team is how he would put it. And not everybody in sports that owns a team gets that, but Pat clearly did, as you pointed out. And that was just sort of one off example that I give you to show that he truly, his instincts, he got that very clearly.
A lot has been made of Pat's philanthropy efforts through the years, and a lot about what he donated financially. But in your eyes and what you saw, in what ways did he get personally involved with a lot of these charities, and why were they so important to him?
Well, he understood the importance of his position, the team's position, in giving back to the community. And he was very insistent about making sure that it was the Broncos and not him, and that didn't always work out because he was the owner of the team. But I remember at the time Cindy Kellogg was our community development, head of the community development department in 2003, and she said, I've got this idea about narrowing down some of our community focus and really making an impact with kids at the Boys and Girls Club. And I said, this is a great plan, but you're going to have to go next door and sell it to the owner because it was a big financial commitment. We have our own club out in the Montbello area, as you know. And Cindy went in there. I didn't go in with her. And they were in there for an hour and a half talking about it. And Cindy came out saying, I've never seen someone so engaged and so passionate about something. It was, he not only did he buy into her plan, but he embraced it. He was a part of it. He didn't do that publicly, but internally, if you spoke to him about those things, he was never dismissive of community efforts. He would want to know what we were doing. He participated in a lot of various causes himself, albeit quite quietly, it was important to him, and I think we all recognize that, and we've tried to continue to carry that out for him here.
I hope it's not too soon in asking this, but I know there's been some speculation and questions already. Does anything change moving forward as far as the succession plan or some of the other things going on in the background?
Yeah, I want to be careful and be sensitive to the family. Obviously, this is a tough time for them when answering these questions. I would just tell you that nothing has changed. Pat prepared himself for this day, planned ahead for this day. The trustees are going to follow Pat's plan. I'm going to carry out what Pat asked me to do and honor what he asked me to do. And that's really as much as I would say at this time.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you.
Well, obviously this is always a very difficult time. Finality is always, very difficult. We've known this point was going to come at some point in time, and obviously a very difficult time. I think Joe did a tremendous job of kind of telling you what Pat was all about. I was very fortunate to play for him and work for him, and in thinking about what would I say about Pat that would stick and everybody could remember? And I think that the one thing that I think about Pat when I think about him and this football team was he ran this football team with his heart and not his pocketbook. And the players felt that. And that's where, when you talk about the relationships that he had with the players, why was he so close to the players? Because I think Pat never allowed the money to get in the way of that. And I think that he did a heck of a job of hiring people to do that, so he didn't have to do that, and so the money would not interfere with the relationship that he could have with his players. And I think that was evident when, he was out there at practice all the time. And as a player, there's nothing that means more than, when your owner and the main boss is out there at practice every single day. There's nothing that makes it more important to you than him being out there, because if it's that important to him, it rubbed off on us as players. And so just a tremendous guy to play for. I will tell you that, and I've said it so many times before, that as players we were so lucky to play for Pat, because Pat put football first. And as a player, that's all you could ask for, was the opportunity to compete for world championships. Pat wanted to win world championships, and that's what he gave us the ability to do. And every bit of resource that he had and he could do went to the football team. And so as a player, you can't ask for anything else. The time that I got to spend with Pat personally as a friend, played a lot of golf with him when I was playing. I think the most special time that Pat, and I think a lot of guys would talk about this, that the most special time we always had with Pat was when we were in the Pro Bowl. And, Pat had his restaurants over in Hawaii, and we'd go over for the Pro Bowls and get an opportunity to spend a lot of time with him. He was proud of his restaurants, but he was, he'd walk in that restaurant and he was more proud of the guys that he was walking into with, and walking in with his players, be able to walk in with his players into his restaurant. Not too many times we have a private room. We sat out in the public, and he enjoyed that. And you could tell that that made him feel good. And when it made him feel good, it made us feel good, that we were with him. So that's one time that, I'll always, those times I always remember, going to the Outrigger Canoe Club with him. I mean, that was his second home when he was in Hawaii. And, we'd get in those canoes and, go wave surfing. And, that's when you saw Pat, when he was in his best, was when you got him in those situations. And that was really good. We got a chance to do that until we tipped one, and I was still playing. He said, okay, that's the last time we're riding waves in an outrigger canoe until you're done playing. But those are the special times when we got to spend with Pat over there. The other funny was playing golf over there, and he always had, being from over there, he had a lot of friends that always wanted to play golf, and we'd go over and play in the Pro Bowl, and we'd go play golf. And he always had his buddies there, and his buddies had been playing for 6 months. We hadn't played for 6 months, but we were always on the same team. And we got blasted every time we played them. But we'd go back the next year, and he'd say, okay, well, we're going to play him again. I said, well, do you remember what happened last year? He goes, yeah, and we're going to beat him this year. Meanwhile, we haven't played in 6 months. So, but just the time, the thing that I really remember, especially being in Hawaii with him, is the pride that he had, and the players and the players that were with him, and that the guys were over there, that, that was his special time with us. And so, that's the time that I'll always remember. And I will also say that, and Joe said so many, hit everything right on the nose, and so eloquently said that, my condolences go out to the family, and because even though it's expected, the finality was always hard, and so he will be missed. I was fortunate to also get a chance to work for him, and as Joe said, he was in my office every day, wanting to know what was going on, and the one thing that I'll touch on that Joe said was, he was a great communicator, but he was also a great listener, and because he was always taking information in. And the one thing that I learned from him is, and then I thought about it is, you get better when you're listening. You're not getting any better if you're talking. And he was always interested in what was going on. He wanted to gain the knowledge of what was going on with his football team, and that's why he spent so much time, in the building, in my office, in Joe's office, and the head, Mike Shanahan's office, that, because he wanted to know what was going on. And so, it was special. And so, there's no words of gratitude that adjectives that can explain how much I appreciate and what Pat Bowlen's done for me and my family. Getting to play for him for 15 years. I hired my dad my dad was here the last 6 years of his life, and so the people that I've met when I was here, the influence of the players that I played with, and the people that he had in this organization. I consider myself the luckiest guy in the world to get an opportunity to play for him like that, and then also get an opportunity to work for him, come back and work for him. As I said, I don't have the words that would explain how much that means to me and how much Pat Bowlen meant to me and my family and allowed us and the opportunities that he did give us. And so he will be missed, but I know he won't be around, but I know that every time we play a football game in Mile High or on the road, Pat Bowlen's still going to be a part of it. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
John, you talked about him being in your office every day, and Joe mentioned that, and then there was obviously a time that he wasn't. But how easy did it make your job knowing the standard and expectation that he set for you and your football team?
Well, I mean, that's the standard runs throughout the organization, and that, it's much easier when the standard is being set by the top, and that's what he set. And so that's why it's much easier as a manager. It's much easier to follow that standard that he has set than then try to create it yourself. And so by him being the owner and him setting that standard of what he wanted, if you see the sign outside that wants to be the best be at number one at everything. And when that's what the standard is, the expectations are there. And so you don't have to explain what the expectations are all the time. Bottom line is we got to be competitive and we got to compete for championships, and nothing else works. So to have that type of leader and that kind of standard and that kind of culture that he set was tremendous for not only as a player but also as somebody that worked for him.
Yeah, John, are you privy to Pat's plan, going forward here, and how do you think it'll be carried out? And you personally, how do you plan on?
Well, I mean, I'm coming to work every day as I've got 100% trust in what the trust is doing and the plan that Joe's put together and the plan that Pat put together, knowing that this was coming down. And so I've got 100% confidence in that this organization is going to continue to stand on its feet, and whatever direction that may be, it'll be the right direction. And so I know that, as Joe said, that what Pat wanted, and they've planned this out. So, and I know that that's going to be carried out the way that Pat wanted it, and so that's why I've got full confidence that we're going to continue ahead and be successful.
You mentioned some of the off-field moments with him in Hawaii. What was your favorite football memory with him?
I think it was giving him a hug after we won that first Vince Lombardi trophy. I think that he'd been through those 3 losses and how much those 3 losses hurt, and I think it hurt him as much as it hurt us as players. And so to finally be able to win that one against Green Bay, I think was a very special time to finally say that we'd got there. And so I can remember the hug with him in the locker room, and I think we're the last ones out of the locker room too. So that was the most special time, and plus with him raising the trophy, saying this one's for John, was very, it was almost overwhelming because it was a surprise to me, but I just know that how much everybody on that football team, how hard it was, but I don't have the word of the adjective that explains my feelings when he did that.
John, you just mentioned this one's for John. Can you just reflect on what it meant to be able to get him that 3rd championship and to be able to say this one's for Pat?
Yeah, I mean, that was my goal, and so to be able to get that done, and as he said when he introduced me when I was coming back as the GM, that he said, well, maybe one day he'll say this one's for Pat. So that was my goal when I took the job, and so for us to be able to win Super Bowl 50 for him and be able to return that favor was also very much a highlight and something I'll always remember.
John, can you point out one major aspect of leadership you learned from Pat and you implemented as your own, either because you watched him and the way he operated or because he said to you, this is what you should be doing?
I don't remember one instant, but I think the one thing that I remember is the fact that, and I said it earlier, is his ability to listen and to take in information and you know, and I think the other thing that Joe said about him is he was very instinctual, and he was very instinctual about people and understanding what people are about. And I think, and the reason why I think he was so good at that is because of the fact that he wasn't the one doing the talking, he was listening. And so by listening, he always got a really good feel for people and you know, directions. So I think that's the one thing. Les was the fact that he was such a good listener and was able to come back with ideas and just ask questions about he'd ask questions and then give it to him, and he'd continue to ask questions because of the knowledge he wanted to gain from it. And I think when I looked at that and I looked at, you know, the leadership side of it, how important that is to be able to listen. So I would say that was the most important thing.
In that regard, John, you guys were so close for so many years. Did you have confidence, given Pat's competitiveness, that because of him as owner, you guys were going to finally find a way to win a championship? Because he made some changes in the way you guys traveled, the way it seemed like he kind of provided the best of everything. Did you sense kind of from him, like somehow, some way, we're going to figure this out and finally get over the hump?
Well, and I think a lot of that came that, you know, Pat was going to put everything back in the football team that he possibly could and be the leader there when it came to that. So, you know, but the standard was there, right? No matter what, the standard was there. And so, you know, that was the key thing, is that, you know, and it's still to this day, hopefully when guys come here, they understand what we're doing here and what our standard is and what the culture is and why we're here. And it's, number one, Broncos take great care of you like Pat did forever, but also the expectations are high. And the expectations are to go out and compete for world championships. And Pat set that. And, you know, and I think he went to 7 Super Bowls or 8 Super Bowls that, you know, when you set that standard, that starts at the top. And that's why, you know, we can never lose that as far as the Broncos. And because that's what Pat's legacy is the culture that he set and the standard that he set and what the expectations are for us. And also our fans expect it. And, you know, Pat's created that with the fans, which is a good thing, that relationship with the fans. And so, you know, we'll continue to work hard in Pat's memory in that way.
Yeah, John, how did it come about that Pat hired you as GM? Can you kind of tell how that happened?
You know, I'm trying to remember exactly. I came back to practice, started coming out to practice a little bit more, and then after the season was over, if I remember right, or maybe it was a couple after, because I know Josh was fired probably 4 weeks before the end of the year. And so I talked a couple times to Pat as well as Joe, and we were talking about the possibility of me coming back. And so then, you know, eventually, and most of the people know it, we went to dinner down at the restaurant, and you know, we offered me the job down there, and so I was more than glad than appreciative of the opportunity to come back. So that's the best of my.
John, what was one of your first memories or stories of Pat back when you were a player?
It's hard to say. I think that it was kind of funny. I was looking at something today and going back and looking at kind of some of the memories of Pat and just to kind of, you know, reflect and refresh. I think we all thought that Pat was a pretty cool dude when he wore the fur coat on the sidelines at in Cleveland. And he may have wore it before that, but, you know, it's like, hey, I think as players we thought this dude is a cool dude as our owner. And again, you know, what the type guy he was, the competitive guy, the support he had, that, you know, we all thought we were kind of hip because of Pat.
Not to suggest that the drive hasn't been there in the past couple of years, but now that Pat has passed, does it make this coming season even more special for this franchise, or are you more motivated to try and have success on the field?
Sure. There's no question. And the standards have not been met the last couple of years without a doubt. So, you know, there's no question that this is a big year for us, and we understand that. But also, you know, again, going back to the same thing that we're talking about is the standards that have been set here. And you know, Pat would be very disappointed in it. And so it is our job to get it turned around. And that does add, more motivation. Number one, we got to get it turned around, and number two, with Pat, thinking about Pat and it's his memory, there's no question that's more motivation to get this thing turned around.
John, I know that the memory of Pat obviously was leaving it the last couple of years, but what was the last conversation that you had with Pat Bowlen, and what was his biggest piece of advice that he gave to you?
Well, it's been a while, and so I mean, I'd seen Pat probably 5, 6, 7 times a year, and obviously the last 4 or 5 years have been tough, and I was fortunate to see him one last time on Wednesday. But again, not going back to specific conversations, but just again the mentality that he had and what the expectations were, and obviously on our side having the compassion for Pat and what he was going through as well as his family, and it's been a long haul for them, and realize the traumatic episode that obviously with his passing it has come about, but I can't remember one specific conversation. Just know that the guy put up a hell of a fight, and he never stopped, and it's a very, very tough disease, I know that they've done a lot of things in the research to Alzheimer's, and hopefully with the support that the Bowlen family has given to that they can get a resolution to, or a cure to Alzheimer's here in the near future.
John, just curious, when you're making individual decisions for the team, do you catch yourself thinking, what would Pat say in this situation?
Well, I mean, again, it goes back to the standards, no question. I think that there's there's always a fine line there, but there's no question. Every decision that I make is based off what Pat would do and what the Denver Broncos, what's the best decision for the Denver Broncos, and that's not my personal opinions or anybody else's, but we got the common denominator, and when we look at decisions being made, is what's best for the Denver Broncos, and so. And with that being in mind, Pat Bowlen made the Denver Broncos, and he set that standard, and so everything is based off that.